Easter Sunday 2020. Because of the coronavirus pandemic that's happening all around the globe, most people are staying home today, as they should, instead of visiting their normal Easter Sunday services. There are a lot of virtual services happening, and there are a lot of people who are just doing nothing. Jewish people have just finished celebrating Passover, and the Feast of Unleavened Bread has just begun, which is distinct from Passover, by the way. Messianic Jewish people are remembering the Passover lamb, who was a foreshadow of Christ, Yeshua, the Lamb of God. And they're also remembering the bread they baked that was without leaven, how they broke it, how they ate it quickly on the go, just like Christ, who, without sin, was broken on our behalf and was given to us as the bread of life. And bread is our topic today. Okay, so from the beginning, bread has always been a main staple for practically all cultures around the globe. So it's no wonder that God chose to use bread as one of the most important object lessons in the Bible. It's really interesting to me how God can organize certain things in the Bible like this to be meaningful to all people throughout all generations. There are some interesting verses in the blessing and cursing section in Deuteronomy that I'd like to go through with you for a minute. Chapter 28, verses 1 to 5. And if you faithfully obey the voice of the Lord your God, being careful to do all his commandments that I command you today, the Lord your God will set you high above all the nations of the earth, and all these blessings shall come upon you and overtake you, if you obey the voice of the Lord your God. Blessed shall you be in the city, and blessed shall you be in the field. Blessed shall be the fruit of your womb, and the fruit of your ground, and the fruit of your cattle, the increase of your herds, and the young of your flock. Blessed shall be your basket and your kneading bowl. Interesting. Some translations have kneading trough or kneading board, but most say kneading bowl. And then again in the cursing section, verses 15 to 17. But if you will not obey the voice of the Lord your God, or be careful to do all his commandments and his statutes that I command you today, then all these curses shall come upon you and overtake you. Cursed shall you be in the city, and cursed shall you be in the field. Cursed shall be your basket and your kneading bowl. Now, some commentators say that if your kneading bowl was blessed, then it wouldn't break. And if your kneading bowl was cursed, then it would break, and you wouldn't have any bread. But that doesn't really make sense to me because you don't need it to make bread. You need it to make good bread. So I suspect that the blessing and cursing refers more to the quality of the bread. Today, we have hundreds of years of discoveries in chemistry and science to help us make consistent bread almost every time. But in Bible times, yeast was not the easiest thing to work with. It was hit and miss, more or less. The conditions had to be just right for the bread to turn out good. So if you have ever made bread from scratch, then you know that if your dough didn't react correctly, then it was pretty much a failure. You just threw it away or started over. So when the ancient Israelites prepared their dough in their kneading bowls, they would leave it in there and let it rise. And depending on how the dough reacted, determined whether or not you had good or bad bread. So a blessed kneading bowl would produce good bread, and a cursed one would produce bad quality bread. As an American living in Europe, I know how hard it is to make good bread. In America, we do not have the culture of bread like we do here in Europe. The bread aisle at the typical supermarket in America looks like this. All nicely packaged and organized. Usually none of it's fresh. Although recently in America there is a kind of hipster foodie movement, and many people are trying to make what they call artisan bread. But over here in Europe, that's just called bread. So this is what it looks like in our supermarkets here in Czech. Oh, yes, fresh bread, no packaging. What you're supposed to do is grab one of these gloves and help yourself to the bread, but I never see people using them. They just grab it. Sometimes they squeeze it, see if it's still soft, and they just leave it there. It's kind of gross, but it's fresh bread and it's amazing. Check out this bread over here on the right. These are rolls that have 3 slices of bacon on the top and 3 slices of cheese, and it's baked that way. Wow, but okay, this is Passover, so let's not talk about bacon. Check out this place. This is a normal supermarket in Poland, just over the border, which is now closed. The border is closed. What's weird is that even today, with all that's going on with COVID-19, this is still how you buy bread here. You would think that they would cover up the bread or something, but no. It's all still open and unpackaged and fresh and amazing. This is what you bring home. It looks exactly like this. Fresh, unpackaged bread from the shop every day. Now, in America, because all we have is that nasty, sliced, preservative packed bread, people are trying their hand at making real bread at home. And one such person is my sister, Faith. And she is crazy about real bread. And I mean crazy. She wanted real bread so bad that back in Missouri, she decided to build a gigantic outdoor wood burning oven. So here is the story of our oven. One day, snow buildup destroyed a section of our covered parking space. So you can see the snow was building up like a foot. Then it broke through and just destroyed this one section. So we decided to use that section to build the oven. And we started gathering large stones for the foundation. Very large stones. These were part of the foundation of an old house that we found on our property. This is my wife filling in the cracks with gravel. And this is me, half dead on the altar of real bread. So we have these 3 layers, solid rock and gravel. And here is the bread princess, my bread baker sister, Faith. She's the best. Then some fire brick. Then some skill. That's why I'm not in this picture. Some insulation. This is some kind of fiberglass heating insulation stuff. Then another thick layer of concrete. Then some finishing touches around the edges. Then another layer of concrete. Then some paint. And then preheating for like 6 hours. And then finally, after all that, real bread. My point in all of this is that real bread is hard to make. Okay, maybe that was a bit excessive, but I remember my sister always stressing about her starter or the dough over rising or not rising enough. She was constantly on the internet learning and researching about yeast and leaven. And I was thinking, if it's so hard to make good bread now with all the technology we have, how hard must it have been for them thousands of years ago? Okay, for the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the Israelites were supposed to clear out all leaven from their homes, right? But what's the difference between yeast and leaven, and why did they have to do this? Well, yeast is a single fungus which is naturally occurring. For example, the white film you see on grapes or on some leaves is yeast. This is what was most likely used to leaven bread. Leaven is kind of the same thing, but in a slightly different form. Bread bakers call it starter. It's fermented dough reserved for producing fermentation in a new batch of dough later on. This is something you can keep forever if you maintain it properly and have the right conditions, but it's again not easy. So the yeast converts sugars into carbon dioxide bubbles, which causes bread to rise. So you put yeast in the bread. Over time, the yeast permeates the whole thing, permeates the dough. So why did they have to remove all leaven from their homes? Jewish people still do this today, by the way. It's kind of like their spring cleaning during the Feast of Unleavened Bread. They do it because leaven was a symbol for sin, which you know, and it's a great symbol. What was the first sin ever? The first sin recorded, and arguably the worst sin of all sins. Do you remember? Pride. Remember with Satan? And what does pride do? It puffs up. 1 Corinthians 4:18-19. Now some are puffed up, arrogant, proud, as though I were not coming to you, but I will come to you shortly, if the Lord wills, and I will know, not the word of those who are puffed up, who are proud and arrogant, but the power. 1 Corinthians 5:2. And you are puffed up, and have not rather mourned that he who has done this deed might be taken away from among you. And 2 Timothy 3:4. Traitors, headstrong, puffed up, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God. Interesting. So just as yeast permeates the dough, sin permeates the world and puffs it up in pride. What's interesting is that you can never really remove all the yeast from your home. Yeast is all around us. It's in the dust, it's in the air, it's everywhere. So no matter how well you clean your home, it's always going to find its way back, just like sin. It's important to remember that we are saved from the power of sin, but not from the presence of sin. Yeast is the perfect example of sin. With each passing second, it grows, it multiplies, it breeds. It's just like how James describes sin in James 1:14-15. But each person is tempted when he is lured and enticed by his own desires. Then desire, when it has conceived, gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is fully grown, brings forth death. Our own desires. Just like yeast, it's naturally there, it's just a matter of time. But Christ, the bread of life, who was born in Bethlehem, the house of bread, he is a different type of bread. He is like unleavened bread, without yeast, without sin. Christ is like this matzah bread that is traditionally used today as unleavened bread. It's striped and pierced, just like Jesus was. So this Easter Sunday, let's remember to clean the leaven out of our hearts and remember how Jesus is our Passover lamb. Just as it's written in 1 Corinthians 5:7-8. Cleanse out the old leaven that you may be a new lump, as you really are unleavened. For Christ, our Passover lamb, has been sacrificed. Let us therefore celebrate this festival not with the old leaven, the leaven of malice and evil, but with unleavened bread of sincerity and truth.